Hey, come along with me to take my painting from gesso to a completed painting. So I always start out with sketching. I kind of just dump a ton of ideas onto pages before I kind of settle on an idea. Then I start to block it out and figure out proportions of what it would look like on different canvas sizes. Once I have that sketch, I build the panel. I like to have a studio depth, so I do 3-inch board, and then this one is 4 by 6 feet. I've already put some layers of gesso down, so I'm just sanding it to get it super smooth before I get into my final layers. Okay, welcome to the studio. Now I'm just putting on another layer of gesso. I like to put a ton down because as I do so much sanding, I'd hate for it to bleed all the way down through to the wood. And then I'm going in with paint. I don't sand between the step because I like to have texture. I have a ton of brushes. I like to collect them, but I inevitably just end up using my hands. I connect with the work a lot at this stage. It's very intuitive, kind of letting the paint tell me what to do, move my hand around, and at this point it's more just about texture. Because the next step is I go in and I sand it again. And so then I'm really just trying to get interesting kind of grit. So I'm going over the acrylic paint and getting a nice texture going down. Welcome to another day in the studio. And today I gotta reorganize because it's projection day. I also, since the last time you saw this, put down a layer of tinted clear gesso. That way I could bring down the vibrancy of some of the colors, create a little bit more of a dreamlike texture. And now here I am just trying out different orientations of my design. I tend to do a lot of looking, going back and forth, seeing where things line up, making minor tweaks, trying to decide how I like the foreground to interact with the background. I used to sketch traditionally, but now that I work so big, I tend to draw digitally and then project it in order to retain proportions. It's a very large part of my process is trying to blend between the foreground and background, and so this is kind of the start of that. And now it's sketching time. So I actually use a kind of funky little method. It started because I used to draw traditionally and then I would transfer that sketch onto my canvas with carbon paper. And I really fell in love with the line quality of a carbon paper transfer. So when I started working larger, I still wanted to keep that quality. It doesn't budge when I do anything on top of it. I can splatter water, I can cover it up, and it will still retain a nice crisp line, which I enjoy. I also wanted for this work in particular though to not have stark line work over the entire thing, that way I can control how dark or light I want certain areas. So I'm going in directly with paint here, and you can see I use a cafeteria tray to paint with, and you can see me checking those lines using the shadows and then going back and forth. That way I can retain a level of delicacy to these branches. I have about 9 children figures on this piece, which is more figures than I've ever put on a work before, and so for each one I wanted to retain a level of detail. So I switched to a smaller projector that I can bring in closer in order to work on each individually. These I worked in both paint and the carbon paper transfer, doing that same blurring between reality and surreality, so keeping those sketch marks in some places and painting in others. On these you can see me using my head to block the shadows and kind of check it. I sped this up quite a bit, but I do think it's quite cool to see it all emerge. However, for the main figure, I wanted her to be a lot more concrete, a lot more clear, a lot more grounded in reality, and so I ended up doing the entirety of her with carbon paper, and I'm now going in and doing an underpainting on top of that. You can see me yapping with people coming into my studio, but I wanted to kind of keep her in the same color scheme as the rest of this for my sketch and underpainting, but I wanted her to feel a lot more grounded in reality than some of the roots and figures below. But let's take a little intermission here to talk about tools. So I use primarily Liquitex and golden paints, and I tend to use a couple acrylic mixes. This is my go-to, the regular gel semi-gloss, And I mix that in to get a little bit more body while still retaining transparency. And I use a continuous mister to keep all of my paints wet all day while I'm working so they don't dry out on me. As you'll see in a second, I use these two Flow Aid additives, retarders, and glazing liquids to give me a little bit more dry time while working in splatter. And here it is, splatter day. We're laying her out flat on the ground. This is always a fun day for me, but also a little bit more nerve-wracking as I get one chance at this before it all dries down. I tend to start with just water that has some of that Flow Aid additive in it to keep it nice and wet the whole day I'm working so I have time to kind of play. And I've before this mixed in buckets tons of different colors. I start with adding a little bit of water at a time to the thicker paint in order to not get any clumps, and I add the Flow Aid additive to those as well. And those you could see were real speed, but here it is sped up as it did take me a good bit of all day. I don't have all of the footage loaded here for you to see, but I just kind of like to have a little bit of a conversation with the paint here. I feel like I'm as much in control as the paint is, so letting it flow, but also kind of manipulating it in different ways. It feels very much akin to kind of how I'm viewing our relationship with the earth as well, where I kind of just let the earth do its thing and try and flow and become one with it. The same thing happens when I'm doing my layers of paint and texture, and then I feel like I'm able to find images and find beauty within those textures just like I do with the earth. Towards the end of the day, I like to control the transparency of different areas by sopping up the water a little bit in certain areas and then squeezing it back out other places. Now's when my fun brushes finally get some play, as I don't tend to use them when I'm doing my first initial layers of finger paint. I always find this process so satisfying to kind of watch the paint flow and move on its own. I also will leave for bits of time and then come back, that way I can see what has happened while I left to kind of prevent myself overworking an area. I always want to make sure I'm still letting the paint do its thing. Alright, and a little bit of a time skip, but here we are, we're deep into the thick of painting. I spent a couple weeks doing this, so I don't have a ton of footage for you guys, otherwise we'd be here all night. But we've made it to the final day of painting. Here I am in my studio, very jazzed to be painting my last piece. I'll show you a little bit of how I set up for the day. So I get out all of my paint colors that I'm going to use first and just kind of leave them out on my palette. And I'll mist the whole thing to keep it wet while I'm working, and I mix up my go-to colors that I'll use the most, that way I can mix from them throughout the day to kind of keep a unified palette. These paints, I've added a lot of gel medium in order to keep them nice and transparent to do some minor touch-up work. Here's that liner brush coming into play. These are all real speeds. This is about how fast I'll be painting throughout a day. I like to use a little bit of cross-hatching in order to retain the texture of the paints, but still be able to have subtle transitions when you stand further back. And we've made it! She's done. Here it is in critique, getting looked at by my peers in art school. A little zoom-in shot as I enter my studio. Thank you all for coming along for this ride. That's how I get my painting from gesso to finished. Bye guys!